The scent of pine, damp earth, and simmering tension clung to the air in the great hall of the Silver Moon Pack. For most, the annual mating ritual was a night of hope, of primal connection, and the forging of new alliances. For Anya, it was a yearly exercise in humiliation. She was wolfless. In a society where one's worth was measured by the strength of their inner beast, she was a void, a flaw in the lineage of an already disgraced family. Her existence was a whisper of shame, and tonight, that whisper felt like a roar in her own ears. She kept her eyes fixed on the polished stone floor, her hands trembling slightly as she refilled a goblet with dark, spiced wine for a preening alpha near the fire. He didn't even acknowledge her, his gaze sweeping the room for a worthy female, one with a strong wolf and wide hips. Anya was invisible, a ghost in a servant's tunic, and she was grateful for it. To be seen was to be judged. "Anya, hurry with that tray." The sharp voice of the pack's head domestic, Martha, cut through her thoughts. "The Alpha King's party arrives soon. Everything must be perfect." Anya flinched, murmuring an apology as she hoisted the heavy silver tray. The Alpha King, King Cassian. His name was a curse on the lips of his enemies and a prayer of fear on the lips of his subjects. The Shadow King, they called him. A ruler of immense power who had unified the warring packs through sheer brutal force. He rarely left his mountain fortress, the onyx spire, and his presence here was an unprecedented honor that had sent every pack in the region into a frenzy of preparation and anxiety. She'd heard the stories, that he had no wolf, but a demon bound to his soul, that his touch could freeze a shifter's blood, that he had never taken a mate because no female could withstand his darkness. They were likely just stories, of course, meant to cultivate his terrifying reputation. Still, a cold dread pooled in Anya's stomach. Her sister Serafina glided past her, a vision in embroidered silks. Serafina was everything Anya was not. Her wolf was strong, her laughter was bright, and she moved with the effortless grace of the truly powerful. She was the family's hope for redemption. If she could catch the eye of a high-ranking alpha, perhaps the stain of their father's failed rebellion years ago would finally begin to fade. "Try not to trip over your own feet tonight, little sister," Serafina said, her voice a mixture of pity and condescension. She touched Anya's arm, a brief, cool gesture. "Just stay in the shadows where you belong. It's safer for you." Anya nodded, the words lodging like stones in her throat. She loved her sister, but Serafina's kindness was a gilded cage, a constant reminder of her own inadequacy. She watched her sister join a circle of eligible females, their vibrant energy a stark contrast to the gray numbness that had become Anya's constant companion. Her only solace was in the quiet moments, the small, unnoticed things. Earlier, she had found one of the hounds whimpering in the kennels, its paw caught in a loose board. While others would have simply yanked it free, Anya had sat with the animal, her voice a low, soothing murmur. She told it a story, a simple tale of a star who was afraid of the dark. The hound's frantic struggles had ceased, its breathing evening out as it listened, allowing her to gently work its paw free without a single snap. It was a useless skill, this strange calm she could project, this ability to weave tales that seemed to quiet the frantic heart of beast or child. It was not strength. It was not power. It was nothing. A sudden hush fell over the great hall. The massive oak doors swung open, and the air grew instantly colder, charged with an oppressive energy that made the hairs on Anya's arms stand on end. He was here. King Cassian stood framed in the doorway, a figure carved from midnight and fury. He was taller than any shifter she had ever seen, with shoulders broad enough to carry the weight of his kingdom. He wore no crown, no ostentatious finery, only simple black leathers that seemed to absorb the torchlight around him. His face was stark and beautiful, all hard planes and sharp angles, but it was his eyes that held the room captive. They were the color of a winter storm, and they held an ancient, unending pain. He moved with the predator's silence, his imposing guards flanking him. Every alpha in the room, men who ruled their own territories with iron fists, bowed their heads in deference. The air crackled with his absolute authority. This was not just an alpha. This was a king. The stories, Anya thought with a fresh wave of terror, had not done him justice. She tried to shrink further into the alcove where she stood, her tray of drinks suddenly feeling impossibly heavy. Her job was to remain unseen, to serve and disappear. She watched as her own alpha, a man known for his blustering pride, approached the king with a deep, reverent bow. The ritual began. Alphas presented themselves, displaying their strength, their shifting prowess. Females, in turn, showcased their grace and power. It was a primal, intoxicating dance of dominance and desire. Anya kept her head down, moving along the edges of the room, her heart a frantic drum against her ribs. She felt like a mouse hiding from a hawk. Then it happened. A boisterous young alpha, clumsy in his attempt to impress Serafina, stumbled backward. He crashed directly into Anya. The silver tray flew from her grasp. Goblets shattered on the stone floor, spraying wine across polished boots. Anya herself was sent sprawling forward, her hands thrown out to break her fall. Time seemed to slow. A collective gasp, sharp and horrified, echoed through the suddenly silent hall. Her desperate, flailing hands had found purchase. One of them, small and trembling, landed directly on the back of a large, black-gloved hand. The hand of King Cassian. A shock, electric and profound, jolted up her arm. It wasn't cold, as the legends claimed. It was searingly hot, a furnace of suppressed power. But beneath the heat, she felt something else. A tremor, a deep, resonant agony that pulsed against her skin for a fleeting second. Her unique, quietening gift flared instinctively, a silent hum of comfort offered to that overwhelming pain. She looked up, her gaze colliding with his. The storm in his eyes was now a raging tempest. But it wasn't fury she saw there. It was pure, unadulterated shock. For a breathtaking instant, the suffocating aura of pain around him lessened, the crushing pressure in the room easing as if a storm had momentarily broken. He stared at her, truly seeing her for the first time, not as a servant, not as a wolfless pariah, but as the source of an impossible, momentary peace. The hall held its breath, waiting for the explosion, waiting for him to strike her down for her insolence. King Cassian did not move. He simply stared, his harsh face a mask of disbelief. The silence stretched, becoming a weapon in itself. Anya felt her blood run cold. This was it. This was how her pathetic life ended. The king's beta, a grim-faced man with a jagged scar across his brow, took a step forward, his hand resting on the hilt of his blade. "Your Majesty?" he prompted, his voice a low rumble of concern. But Cassian didn't seem to hear him. His focus was entirely on Anya, on the small, trembling hand that was still pressed against his own. The world had narrowed to that single point of contact. For the first time in a decade, the gnawing, relentless fire that lived under his skin had receded. It was not gone, but it had been banked, muted by the impossible calm emanating from this slip of a girl. It was a relief so profound it was dizzying, a breath of air to a drowning man. Anya, paralyzed by fear, finally snatched her hand back as if burned. The connection broke. The full monstrous weight of his curse slammed back into him, 1,000 phantom needles digging into his bones. A low groan escaped his lips, so quiet only he and the girl before him could hear it. His control, honed over years of agonizing discipline, nearly fractured. "What is your name?" he demanded. His voice was not a shout, but a low, dangerous command that cut through the silence more effectively than any roar. It was rough, like stones grinding together, and it held the exhaustion of a man who had not known a moment's peace in years. Anya's throat was dry. "Anya, your Majesty?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. She dared not look at her pack alpha, whose face was a mask of apoplectic fury. She had shamed them all. King Cassian's stormy eyes swept over her, taking in the cheap servant's tunic, the frantic pulse at her throat, the utter absence of a wolf's aura about her. She was nothing, a wolfless omega at best. And yet, "You will come with me," he stated. It was not a request. It was a decree, absolute and final. Another wave of shocked murmurs rippled through the hall. Seraphina's beautiful face was a picture of stunned disbelief. Her pack alpha stepped forward, his face pale. "Your Majesty, forgive her. She is simple. A wolfless girl from a shamed bloodline. She is of no use to you. I will have her punished severely for her clumsiness." Cassian's gaze shifted to the alpha, and the temperature in the hall dropped another 10 degrees. "I did not ask for your opinion," he said, his voice laced with ice. "And I did not say she was of use. I said she will come with me." Now he turned his back on the sputtering alpha, a dismissal more profound than any blow. His beta, Gideon, moved with practiced efficiency, his hand firmly but not unkindly, closing around Anya's upper arm. She was being taken, not punished, not killed, but taken. For what? She couldn't imagine. Was this some crueler fate? A life of servitude in his dark, isolated fortress? A plaything for a monstrous king? Her mind reeled with terrifying possibilities. As Gideon led her away, her legs moving on their own accord, she caught Seraphina's eye. Her sister's expression was a complex mixture of horror, confusion, and a tiny, ugly flicker of jealousy. Anya, the worthless one, had captured the attention of the most powerful man on the continent. The world had turned upside down. The journey to the onyx spire was a blur of wind and fear. Anya was placed on a horse and tethered to Gideon's saddle, a silent piece of luggage. The king and his guard rode with a speed that devoured the landscape, their powerful war horses eating up the miles through the moonlit forest. Anya clung on for dear life, the rhythmic pounding of hooves a counterpoint to the wild beating of her own heart. They arrived as the first hint of dawn painted the eastern sky in shades of gray and rose. The onyx spire was not a castle. It was a wound in the mountainside, a fortress of black, volcanic rock that clawed at the sky. It was stark, foreboding, and utterly without warmth, a perfect reflection of its master. Anya was led through cavernous, echoing halls. There were no tapestries, no art, only cold stone and flickering torches that cast long, dancing shadows. The air was thin and frigid. It felt less like a home and more like a tomb. She was deposited in a small Spartan room with a narrow bed, a wash basin, and a single barred window overlooking a sheer drop. A prison cell. Gideon paused at the door. The king will summon you when he is ready. Do not try to leave this room. His scarred face was unreadable, but his eyes held a hint of something that might have been pity. Then he was gone, the heavy bolt of the door sliding home with a deafening thud. Anya was alone with her terror. Hours passed. She paced the small room, her mind a whirlwind of confusion. Why was she here? What did he want from her? The memory of his touch, of that searing heat in the deep well of pain beneath it, returned to her again and again. It was a mystery she couldn't solve. Later, a silent servant brought a tray with bread, cheese, and water. Anya was too terrified to eat. The sun set, plunging her cell into darkness, and still she waited. The silence of the fortress was more unnerving than the noise of the great hall had been. It was a dead silence, heavy and suffocating. It was well after midnight when the bolt on her door was drawn back. Gideon stood there, his expression as grim as ever. The king requires your presence. Her heart leapt into her throat. This was it. She followed him through winding, torchlit corridors, deeper into the heart of the spire. They arrived at a pair of massive iron-bound doors. Gideon pushed one open and gestured for her to enter. The room was the king's private study. It was vast, dominated by a huge hearth where a fire roared, and shelves overflowing with books and scrolls. But Anya barely noticed the room's contents. Her attention was fixed on the man standing by the fire, his back to her. King Cassian had shed his leathers for a simple black tunic and trousers. He was staring into the flames, one hand braced against the stone mantelpiece. As she stepped into the room, he turned. The firelight cast his face in a harsh relief, accentuating the shadows under his eyes. He looked tired, worn down to the bone. And then she saw it. For a split second, as he moved, the sleeve of his tunic rode up his arm. Dark, shadow-like veins pulsed just beneath his skin, an inky corruption that seemed to writhe with a life of its own. He saw her gaze flicker and instantly pulled the sleeve down, his expression hardening into a familiar, cold mask. It was a glimpse into his hidden vulnerability, a confirmation of the agony she had sensed. He was not just a tyrant, he was a man in constant, excruciating pain. "Come here," he commanded, his voice low and strained. Anya approached him cautiously, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. She stopped a few feet away, her eyes on the floor. "I will not harm you," he said, though his tone held no reassurance. "I want you to do something for me." He paused, and she could feel the weight of his stare. "Touch my hand, as you did before." The command hung in the air between them, sharp and strange. Anya's head snapped up, her eyes wide with disbelief. Touch him? Willingly. Every instinct screamed at her to flee, to cower, to do anything but obey. He was the Shadow King, a being of immense, terrifying power. To touch him felt like sacrilege, like inviting a lightning strike. Yet, she remembered the flicker of shock in his eyes, the momentary easing of the oppressive aura around him. She remembered the pulsing, shadowy veins on his arm, a visible sign of the torment she had sensed. He was not asking for a show of dominance. He was asking for what? Relief? I I don't understand, Your Majesty, she stammered, her voice a reedy whisper, a muscle feathered in his jaw. You do not need to understand. You need to obey. His voice was tight with impatience, but also with a thread of something else. Desperation. It was a sound so at odds with his powerful persona that it startled her more than any threat. Slowly, hesitantly, she took a step closer. The heat from the fire warmed one side of her face, while the chilling presence of the king cooled the other. He extended his right hand, the same one she had touched before. It was bare now, the glove removed. His fingers were long and calloused, a warrior's hand, but it was held unnaturally still, as if restraining a violent tremor. Anya's own hand felt cold and clammy. She raised it, her movements shaky and uncertain. Her fingertips hovered just above his skin. She could feel the heat radiating from him, a palpable aura of power and pain. Taking a shallow, steadying breath, she closed the distance. The moment her skin made contact with his, the same jolt as before shot through her. But this time, she was prepared for it. It was a current of pure energy, a meeting of two opposing forces. His power was a raging inferno, hers was a cool, quiet spring. As she flattened her palm against the back of his hand, she felt the deep, thrumming agony within him once more. She didn't pull away. Instead, acting on an instinct she didn't know she possessed, she focused. She let that quiet, soothing part of herself flow from her, not as a thought, but as a feeling. She imagined a calm, silent pool of water dousing a furious fire. Cassian's breath hitched. His entire body went rigid. Through their connection, Anya felt the change. The screaming torment inside him didn't vanish, but its sharpest edges were blunted. The thousand needles became a dull ache. The raging inferno subsided to a manageable burn. He closed his eyes, a flicker of profound, bone-deep relief crossing his harsh features. It was the first time she had seen him look anything other than pained or angry. He looked peaceful. They stood like that for a long moment, locked in a strange, silent tableau. The only sounds were the crackling of the fire and the soft whisper of their breathing. Anya's fear began to recede, replaced by a bewildering sense of purpose. This was what he wanted. This was why he had brought her here. She was his antidote. Finally, he pulled his hand away, breaking the connection. The relief on his face vanished, replaced by his usual guarded mask. But she could see the effort it took. He looked at her, his storm gray eyes intense and analytical. How? He asked, his voice rough. What magic is this? You are wolfless. I don't know, Anya answered truthfully. I have no magic. I can sometimes calm things, frightened animals, crying children, nothing more. She looked down at her hands as if they belonged to someone else. It has never been like this. He paced before the fire, his movements restless, caged. For 10 years since my ascension, I have been afflicted, a curse on my bloodline. It is a constant pain, a fire in my veins that never ceases. The greatest healers in the 5 kingdoms have found no cure. Mages have found no counterspell. Yet you, a wolfless girl from a backwater pack, can soothe it with a touch. The confession stunned her into silence. The rumors were true, but they were also wrong. It wasn't a demon he was bound to, but a curse. A decade of unrelenting agony. The thought was horrifying. It explained his coldness, his isolation, his fearsome reputation. They were all defenses, armor built to hide an unbearable weakness. "You will stay here," he said, his back still to her. "You will remain in my presence. When I require it, you will provide this." He gestured vaguely with his hand. "In return, you will have my protection. Your family will be elevated. Your pack will be rewarded. You will want for nothing." It was a transaction, her strange, useless ability in exchange for safety and fortune. A golden cage. It should have felt like a victory, a reversal of her miserable fate. Instead, it felt like a different kind of servitude. "What if I refuse?" The words were out before she could stop them, a small spark of defiance she didn't know she had. Cassian turned slowly, his eyes narrowing. The air grew cold again. "Refusal is not an option. You saw what happens in my lands to those who defy me. Do not mistake my desperation for weakness, girl. You are my property now." The threat was clear, and the brief moment of connection they'd shared vanished like smoke. He was still the Shadow King, and she was still his prisoner. And so, her new life began. She was moved from the cell to a comfortable suite of rooms adjoining the king's. She was given fine clothes, and her meals were no longer bread and water. But she was never allowed to leave the royal wing of the spire. She was a well-kept bird in a gilded cage. Their routine was established quickly. She spent her days in his study, sitting quietly on a cushioned bench by the window while he worked. He would pore over maps, dictate letters to Gideon, and hold tense meetings with his commanders. And several times a day, when the pain became too much to bear, he would summon her. "Anya." She would go to him, place her hand on his, and offer her silent, soothing gift. The moments were brief, impersonal, and charged with a strange intimacy that neither of them acknowledged. She was his living medicine, a tool to be used. But as the weeks passed, something shifted. He began to speak to her. At first, it was just commands. "Read to me." She would pick up a book of history or law and read in her low, steady voice. She discovered that her voice alone seemed to have a palliative effect on him. The tension would ease from his shoulders, the hard lines of his face softening as he listened. He never looked at her while she read, always staring into the fire or out the window at the snow-capped peaks. But she knew. He was listening to every word. He started asking her questions about her home, about her family. He listened, impassive, as she spoke of her wolflessness, of the shame and pity that had defined her life. She found herself telling him about her father's disgrace, about her sister's brilliance, about her own small, secret world of soothing, frightened things. He was the first person who had ever listened without judgment. One evening, a raven arrived with a message. Cassian read it, and his face grew dark. A low growl rumbled in his chest. "What is it?" Anya asked, her voice soft. He looked up, surprised that she had dared to ask. He hesitated, then said, My uncle, Lord Vorlag. He is coming for the winter court. He wishes to observe the state of the kingdom. The disdain in his voice was thick. He believes my father was a weak fool, and that I am weaker still. He circles like a vulture, waiting for me to falter. Anya felt a chill that had nothing to do with the mountain air. She had heard of Lord Vorlag. He was a traditionalist, a zealot who believed that strength was the only virtue and that any perceived weakness should be purged with fire. The thought of this man seeing her, the wolfless girl at the king's side, filled her with a sense of impending doom. Vorlag's arrival would be a test, and she feared it was one they were destined to fail. Lord Vorlag arrived with the first heavy snow of winter, sweeping into the onyx spire with a retinue of grim-faced warriors and an aura of arrogant piety. He was a large man, built like a battering ram, with a thick gray beard and eyes as cold and hard as river stones. Where Cassian's power was a tightly controlled storm, Vorlag's was a blunt, brutal force, wielded without finesse or restraint. He greeted his nephew in the great hall with a perfunctory bow that was more of a challenge than a show of respect. "Your Majesty," he boomed, his voice echoing off the stone walls. "You look strained. The burdens of the crown weigh heavily, I see." "The crown is no heavier than it has ever been, uncle," Cassian replied, his voice a dangerous, level calm. He stood beside his throne, a pillar of black against the gray stone, with Anya standing a few paces behind him, as she always did now. Vorlag's cold eyes slid past Cassian and landed on Anya. A look of profound disgust twisted his features. He sniffed the air disdainfully. "What is this? The stench of the wolfless is polluting your very throne room. Have you taken to keeping pets now, nephew?" Anya flinched as if struck. The familiar shame washed over her, hot and suffocating. All the king's guards and servants stared at her, their faces reflecting Vorlag's contempt. Before Anya could shrink away, Cassian took a deliberate step to the side, partially shielding her with his body. It was a small, almost imperceptible gesture, but to Anya, it felt like a shield had been raised. "This is Anya," Cassian said, his voice dropping to a lethal quiet. "She is under my personal protection. You will show her the respect due to any member of my court, or you will find your welcome here has expired." Vorlag's eyebrows shot up in feigned surprise, though a cruel smirk played on his lips. "Protection? For a broken thing like that? What use could she possibly be to a king? Unless the rumors of your affliction have more truth to them than I imagined. Perhaps you require a living crutch." The barb hit its mark. Anya felt Cassian tense beside her, a wave of fury and pain rolling off him in palpable waves. The curse always flared with strong emotion. She saw his hand clench into a fist at his side, the knuckles white. Instinctively, she reached out and, under the cover of her own simple dress, her fingers brushed against the back of his hand. The contact was brief, a ghost of a touch, but it was enough. She pushed a wave of calm into him, a silent plea to hold on, to not let this brute provoke him. He drew a sharp, controlled breath, and the killing rage in his eyes subsided to a cold, banked fire. The exchange lasted only a second, unnoticed by anyone but them. But Vorlag, ever watchful, saw the minute shift in Cassian's demeanor. His eyes narrowed, a flicker of cunning calculation within them. He didn't know what he had just witnessed, but he knew it was significant. He had found a chink in his nephew's armor, and her name was Anya. The days that followed were a torment. Vorlage was a constant, menacing presence in the fortress. He missed no opportunity to belittle Anya, making loud, pointed comments about the wolfless stray and the king who was weak enough to keep her. He challenged Cassian's decisions in council, questioned his military strategies, and subtly spread dissent among the visiting lords, planting seeds of doubt about the king's fitness to rule. Cassian bore it all with a stoic, icy silence, but Anya could feel the toll it was taking on him. The curse was more active than ever, stirred by the constant stress and his suppressed rage. He required her touch more frequently, the sessions lasting longer. During those moments in the privacy of his study, the mask would fall. He is trying to bait me into a public display of weakness, Cassian growled one evening, pacing before the fire after a particularly galling council meeting. His arm was bothering him badly. The shadow veins were a dark web reaching for his elbow. Anya sat watching him, her heart aching for him. "He wants you to lose control," she said softly. He stopped and looked at her, his expression raw. "If the court were to see me in the grip of the curse, see what it truly does to me, Vorlag would have all the support he needs to challenge my throne. They would not follow a monster." "You are not a monster," she whispered, the words heartfelt and true. She had seen his pain, his struggle, his profound loneliness. He was a man trapped in a waking nightmare, fighting every single day to hold himself together for the sake of his kingdom. He gave a short, bitter laugh. "You are the only person in this world who would say that." He came to her, sinking to one knee before her chair, a shocking act of vulnerability from a king. He took her hand, not for the relief it offered, but simply to hold it. His thumb stroked the back of her palm. "Why are you not afraid of me, Anya?" "I was," she admitted, "but it's hard to be afraid of someone when you see their pain." His stormy eyes searched hers, looking for falsehood, for pity, for the revulsion he expected. He found none. He saw only a deep, quiet empathy that mirrored the calm she pushed into his soul. A fragile, unspoken bond had been growing between them in the silent hours of his study, a bond forged in shared solitude and secret pain. It was more than just a transaction now. He was beginning to rely on her for more than just relief from the curse. He was relying on her presence, her quiet strength. The tension in the fortress finally snapped during the feast of the winter solstice. The great hall was filled with all the visiting lords, and the air was thick with political maneuvering disguised as celebration. Vorlag, drunk on wine and arrogance, rose to offer a toast. "To the king," he shouted, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "A king so compassionate, he elevates the lowest of the low, a testament to his gentle heart." His gaze locked on Anya, who was standing in her usual place behind Cassian's chair. "In fact, I believe a demonstration is in order. Let us see the worth of the king's new favorite." Before anyone could react, Vorlag grabbed a burning log from a nearby sconce and hurled it. It wasn't aimed at the king, but at the heavy tapestries behind the throne. They caught fire instantly, flames roaring up the ancient fabric. Panic erupted, but it was a diversion. As the guards rushed to contain the fire, one of Vorlag's personal warriors, a brute of a man, lunged from the crowd. He wasn't heading for Cassian. He was heading for Anya, a long, wicked-looking dagger in his hand. It was an assassination attempt, disguised as chaos. Vorlag's plan was clear: eliminate the king's crutch and watch him crumble. Time seemed to warp, stretching and slowing as the assassin closed the distance. Anya was frozen, her mind unable to process the glint of steel and the murderous intent in the warrior's eyes. Shouts erupted around her, but they sounded distant, as if coming from underwater. Her life, which had only just begun to feel like it had meaning, was about to be extinguished. Cassian moved. He didn't hesitate, didn't calculate. He reacted with pure, primal instinct. With a roar that was more beast than man, he launched himself from his throne, not toward the assassin, but in front of Anya. He became a living shield, his body covering hers completely. The dagger, meant for her heart, plunged deep into Cassian's side. A collective gasp sucked the air from the hall. Cassian staggered, a choked cry of agony torn from his throat. It wasn't just the pain of the blade. The steel was coated with something dark and viscous. A poison. Anya felt it through her own senses, a venom specifically designed to aggravate his curse. The effect was immediate and catastrophic. The shadowy veins on his skin exploded into view, no longer confined to his arm, but crawling across his neck and face like grasping tendrils of living darkness. His body began to convulse, his control shattering completely. The oppressive aura of pain he normally kept leashed erupted from him, a psychic shockwave that sent nearby lords stumbling back, clutching their heads. "Behold your king," Vorlag bellowed over the chaos, his face triumphant. "A monster! A cursed beast, unfit to rule. He is weak, dependent on a wolfless whore to keep his own demons at bay." Gideon and the royal guards were instantly on Vorlag and his men, the clash of steel ringing through the hall. But Anya saw none of it. Her world had narrowed to the man collapsing in front of her. Cassian fell to his knees, his hands clawing at his side as the poison and the curse waged a devastating war within him. His form seemed to shimmer, his silhouette elongating, his features twisting in a way that was not quite human. The monster he feared becoming was breaking free. He looked at her, his eyes wide with agony and terror, not for himself, but for her. "Run," he rasped, his voice a distorted growl. "Get away from me." But Anya didn't run. All the fear she had ever felt in her life coalesced into a single, sharp point of clarity. She would not abandon him. She would not let this man who had shielded her with his own body be consumed by the darkness. She dropped to her knees before him, ignoring the shouts and the fighting. She placed both her hands on his face, her touch firm and steady despite the tremors racking his body. The shadowy veins writhed under her palms, cold and malevolent. "Look at me, Cassian," she commanded, her voice ringing with an authority she had never known she possessed. He had never told her his given name, but she knew it as if it had been whispered into her soul. His pain-filled eyes focused on hers. She poured her gift into him, not the gentle stream she normally used, but a floodgate, a torrent of every ounce of calm and quiet strength within her. She pushed it against the tide of the curse, a desperate attempt to hold back the encroaching night. The shadows receded from his face, the convulsions lessening. He gasped, his body still tense, but no longer on the verge of a monstrous transformation. He had regained a sliver of control, thanks to her. In the background, the fighting had stopped. Gideon had Vorlag on his knees, a blade to his throat. Every eye in the hall was now fixed on the king and the wolfless girl who held his face in her hands, holding back a tide of dark magic no one had ever witnessed before. Cassian, weakened and bleeding, but lucid, rose unsteadily to his feet, pulling Anya up with him. He kept one arm wrapped around her, holding her to his injured side as if she were his anchor in a raging sea. "Lord Vorlag," he said, his voice ragged but clear, each word an effort. "For treason, for attempted murder of a protected member of my court, and for the use of forbidden poisons, you are sentenced to death." Vorlag spat on the floor. "Kill me, then. But they have all seen you. They have seen the monster you are." "They have seen a king who was poisoned," Cassian countered, his gaze sweeping the stunned faces of the lords. "And they have seen the woman who saved him." He looked down at Anya, his expression softening with a fierce, protective emotion she had never seen before. "She is not my crutch. She is my strength." It was a public declaration, a defiance of every tradition their society held dear. He was not just protecting her, he was elevating her, acknowledging her worth in front of the entire ruling class. But the poison was still in his system. His strength was failing. He swayed on his feet, his breath coming in ragged gasps. "Gideon, the dungeons," he managed, before his eyes rolled back in his head and he collapsed, pulling Anya down with him. The last thing Anya saw before healers and guards swarmed them was the cold, triumphant smile on Vorlag's face as he was dragged away. He might have lost, but he believed his poison would still give him the final victory. The royal healers worked with frantic urgency, but they were fighting a losing battle. The poison was unlike any they had encountered, an alchemical nightmare crafted with the specific purpose of inflaming Cassian's curse. It resisted every antidote, turning his blood to fire and feeding the shadows that now threatened to consume him entirely. Anya was pushed to the side, forced to watch from the doorway of the king's chambers as they packed the wound and poured useless potions down his throat. He was unconscious, his body racked with violent shivers, the dark veins pulsing in a sickening rhythm with his fading heartbeat. His breathing was shallow, a death rattle in the making. "There is nothing more we can do," the head healer, an old, weary wolf shifter, finally admitted, his voice heavy with defeat. He turned to Gideon. "The poison has bonded with his affliction. It is devouring him from the inside out. He will not last the night." Gideon's face, usually a mask of stoic resolve, crumpled in despair. He looked from his dying king to Anya, his eyes filled with a desperate, hopeless plea. Anya pushed past the healers and went to the bedside. Cassian's face was pale and slick with sweat, his features contorted in a rictus of unimaginable pain, even in unconsciousness. The life was fading from him. The vibrant, powerful energy she had always felt from him was now just a guttering ember. She knew what she had to do. It wasn't a thought, but a deep, cellular certainty. Her touch could soothe him, But soothing was no longer enough. He needed more. He needed all of her. "Leave us," she said, her voice quiet but firm. The head healer scoffed. "Child, what can you possibly do?" "Leave us." This time, her voice cracked like a whip, laced with the same innate authority she had discovered in the Great Hall. Gideon, his expression shifting from despair to a flicker of awe, nodded sharply at the healers. "Do as she says. Out now." The healers scurried out, leaving Anya, Gideon, and the dying king alone in the vast, silent chamber. Gideon stood guard at the door, his back to them, affording her a measure of privacy. Anya sat on the edge of the bed and took Cassian's hand. It was cold. She brought it to her cheek, her tears falling onto his skin. All her life she had been told she was broken, incomplete, worthless. But this man, this powerful, tormented king, had looked at her and seen strength. He had protected her, valued her, and now he was dying for her. A fierce, desperate love bloomed in her chest, a love that burned away all her old fears and insecurities. She was not nothing. She was his, and he was hers. She felt it with a certainty that defied all logic. She leaned over him, her hair brushing against his fevered brow. She remembered the stories her grandmother used to tell, ancient tales of the first shifters, of bonds so powerful they could rewrite fate, of mates who could heal each other with a single, true act of love. It was a power that went beyond wolves and magic, a power of the soul itself. "I am not wolfless," she whispered to him, a truth she was only just beginning to understand. "I was just waiting for you." She lowered her head and pressed her lips to his. It was not a soft, tentative kiss. It was an act of pure, unconditional giving. As their lips met, she closed her eyes and unleashed her gift, not as a soothing balm, but as a lightning strike, a torrent of life and light poured directly into his soul. She gave him everything she was, her calm, her resilience, her quiet strength, and the fierce, newfound love that was now the core of her being. Something shattered. A barrier deep within her that had been in place her entire life crumbled to dust. A blinding silver light erupted from her, filling the room, so bright that Gideon cried out and shielded his eyes. At the heart of the light, a new presence awakened within her, her wolf. It was not a normal wolf. It was a creature of moonlight and spirit, ancient and powerful, a being of pure healing and protection. She finally understood. She wasn't wolfless. Her gift, her soothing presence, was her wolf, a different kind of power. A spirit wolf that had been dormant, waiting for the catalyst of a true mate's bond to awaken. Through their kiss, her power flooded into Cassian. The silver light attacked the shadows, burning them away. It neutralized the poison, cleansed his blood, and went straight to the heart of the ancient curse that had plagued his bloodline for generations. It did not just soothe the curse, it unmade it. It healed the fractured soul of his ancestor, breaking the chain of pain forever. The dark veins on his skin dissolved into nothing. The fever broke. The shallow, ragged breaths evened out, deepening into the slow, steady rhythm of healthy sleep. The color returned to his face. The lines of pain smoothed away, leaving only the strong, handsome features of the man beneath. Anya pulled back, gasping, her own body trembling with the force of what had just passed through her. The light receded, coalescing back into her. She felt whole. For the first time in her life, she felt the warm, comforting presence of her own wolf settled peacefully in her soul. Cassian's eyes fluttered open. The storm was gone. They were clear, the color of a calm morning sky after a cleansing rain. He looked at her, his gaze filled with a wonder and love so profound it stole her breath. "Anya," he breathed, his voice clear and strong, free from the rasp of pain for the first time since she had met him. He raised a hand and gently cupped her cheek. "My mate." It wasn't a question. It was a statement of fact, a truth now written on both of their souls. The mating bond, forged not in a ritual of power, but in an act of selfless sacrifice and love, snapped into place, a golden cord of light visible only to them, connecting them heart to heart, soul to soul. Gideon, who had turned back to stare in stunned silence, dropped to one knee. "My queen," he said, his voice thick with emotion. Anya barely heard him. She was lost in the eyes of her mate, her king. The wolfless girl was gone. The outcast was gone. In their place was a queen, with a power more rare and precious than any shifter's strength, and a king who had been reborn in her light. The shadows had fled, and a new dawn was breaking over the onyx spire. News of the king's miraculous recovery and the shattering of his ancient curse spread through the kingdom like a wildfire. It was a tale that bordered on myth. The wolfless servant girl who was not wolfless at all, but the possessor of a sacred spiritual power not seen in generations. The girl who had saved the king not with fang and claw, but with a mate's kiss. Lord Vorlag, awaiting execution in the deepest dungeon of the spire, laughed when he was told, dismissing it as a fanciful lie to cover the king's weakness. His laughter died when Cassian himself came to his cell. The man who stood before him was not the pained, guarded king he had sought to destroy. Cassian stood tall and relaxed, the constant tension gone from his shoulders. The lines of agony were erased from his face, and his eyes were clear and calm. The suffocating aura of pain was replaced by a quiet, confident power that was more intimidating than his previous fury had ever been. He was whole. He was healed. "It seems your poison had an unintended effect, Uncle," Cassian said, his voice devoid of anger, holding only a remote, final judgment. "It forced a bond that has saved my life and my lineage. In trying to destroy me, you have made me stronger than ever before." Vorlag stared, his face a mask of disbelief and dawning horror. He had not just failed. He had created the very thing he sought to prevent, a secure, unassailable king. His entire life's ambition had turned to ash in a single night. Cassian did not stay to watch the execution. His place was with his mate. He found Anya on the balcony of her new chambers, their chambers. She was looking out at the snow-covered peaks, a faint silver aura shimmering around her in the morning light. She wore a simple gown of deep blue, but she looked more regal than any queen in ceremonial robes. The timid, fearful girl was gone forever. She stood with a quiet confidence, a newfound grace that came from finally understanding her own worth. He came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist and pulling her back against his chest. She leaned into his embrace, her head resting on his shoulder. They fit together perfectly. "My family has been summoned," she said softly, her voice holding a hint of apprehension. My sister, they are coming to celebrate our union, not to judge you, he murmured into her hair. No one will ever look down on you again. I will tear out the tongue of any who dare. Anya smiled, a genuine, radiant smile that made his heart ache with love. I don't think that will be necessary. It's strange. I spent my whole life being afraid of what others thought of me. And now, it just doesn't matter. The only opinion I care about is yours. And my opinion, he said, turning her in his arms to face him, is that you are the most powerful, beautiful, and courageous woman in this world. You walked into my darkness and showed me the sun. He cupped her face, his thumbs gently stroking her cheeks. I love you, Anya. More than my crown, more than my kingdom, more than life itself. And I love you, Cassian, she replied, her own eyes shining. The formal uniting ceremony was held a week later. Every important lord and alpha from the 5 kingdoms was in attendance, their curiosity and awe palpable. They had come expecting to witness a political necessity. They were instead treated to a display of true, undeniable love and power. Anya's family was there, standing in a place of honor. Her father wept openly, his face a mixture of pride and regret for the years he had treated his daughter as a burden. Serafina stood beside him, her beautiful face humbled. When she met Anya's gaze, there was no pity, no condescension, only genuine, tearful admiration. She gave a small, reverent bow to her little sister, the queen. Cassian and Anya stood before the ancient hearthstone in the center of the great hall. He wore the black and silver of his house, and she wore a gown of pure white, embroidered with silver thread that seemed to glow with its own light. There was no need for long speeches or complex rituals. Cassian simply took her hand, their fingers lacing together. Before my people and the spirits of old, he declared, his voice ringing with conviction, I claim Anya as my mate, my wife, my queen. Her heart is my heart, her soul is my soul, her people are my people. Together, we will lead this kingdom into a new age. He then leaned down and, in the tradition of their people, bit gently into the juncture of her neck and shoulder. It was not a mark of ownership, but of union, a permanent sign of the mating bond. Anya felt a jolt of pleasure and completion as his fangs pierced her skin, sealing their connection. The mark glowed with a soft silver light for a moment before settling into an intricate, beautiful tattoo of a spiraling wolf. In response, Anya rose on her toes and pressed a kiss to the same spot on his neck. A silver light flared from her lips, leaving a matching mark on his skin. It was an unprecedented act. A mate had never marked an alpha king before. It was a symbol of their equality, of a partnership that would forever change the foundations of their harsh, patriarchal society. Their union heralded a profound transformation. Under Queen Anya's guidance, the wolfless were no longer outcasts. She established sanctuaries in schools, teaching them to find their own forms of strength, to value empathy, wisdom, and community over brute force. The old, cruel traditions began to erode, replaced by a culture that was learning compassion. The Shadow King's reign, which had begun in fear and pain, was now known as a golden age of peace and justice, guided by the light of his spirit wolf queen. 1 year later, Anya stood on the same balcony, looking out at the same snow-capped mountains. But now, the peaks were gilded by the warm light of a summer evening, and she was not alone. Cassian's arms were wrapped around her, his chin resting on top of her head. In her own arms, she held a small, sleeping bundle wrapped in soft furs. Their son, Rowan, had been born a month prior. He had his father's black hair, and when he was awake, his mother's calm, empathetic eyes. He was proof of their bond, a symbol of the kingdom's miraculous new beginning. The barren, wolfless girl had given the healed king an heir. "He's sleeping," Cassian murmured, his voice a low, happy rumble against her back. "He's always sleeping," Anya laughed softly. "I think he inherited your brooding nature." "And I think he inherited your ability to bring peace wherever he goes," Cassian countered, pressing a kiss to her temple. He looked down at his son, then at his wife, his face filled with a love so deep it was bottomless. The man who had once believed himself doomed to a life of darkness and solitude now had everything he had never dared to dream of. Below them, in the castle courtyard, the sounds of laughter and music drifted up on the evening breeze. Children played where grim-faced warriors once drilled. Merchants and farmers mingled with lords, their old hierarchies softened by the new ethos of the court. The onyx spire, once a fortress of pain, had become a beacon of hope. "Do you ever miss it?" Anya asked, her voice thoughtful. "The fear you commanded, the power that came from being the Shadow King?" Cassian was silent for a moment, considering. "I thought that was power," he said finally. "But it was just a cage made of pain. This," he squeezed her gently, his gaze falling on their son. "This is power. This is strength. This is everything." Anya turned in his arms, her free hand coming up to cup his jaw. The mate marks on their necks glowed faintly in the twilight, a constant, comforting warmth against their skin. "I'm glad I tripped," she whispered, a playful smile touching her lips. He chuckled, the sound rich and full of life. "I'm eternally grateful for your clumsiness, my love." He leaned in and captured her lips in a slow, tender kiss. A kiss not of desperation or healing, but of pure, contented love. The outcast and the broken king had found their salvation in each other, and in doing so, had healed their world. As the sun set behind the mountains, casting their small family in golden light, they stood together, a testament to the fact that the greatest strength is not the power to command, but the courage to love, and that even in the deepest shadows, light is waiting to be born.